Hi again then guys, and welcome to what is of course the last of the reviews of the vehicles to arrive in the game from the 1.25 patch, and what better way to end it than with by far the most expensive car in the patch, the 20 million credit Ford Mark IV, a high roller if ever there was one. And for those who have been around for a long time on the channel, a couple of years in fact, you'll probably recall we have looked at this car before, back in the potato camera days from Gran Turismo 6. It was, as far as I can recall, the last of the 20 million credit cars that I actually purchased. I might have bought the Ferrari 250 GTO after this one, I can't recall, but I know that this was one of the last. Because although it had never been in my sphere of interest before in the Gran Turismo franchise, because I jumped from GT4 straight to GT6, it just didn't appeal to me. I like the GT40, the Golf is a gorgeous car, it's one of my favourites of the 20 million credit club, and I really hope that we get it back, although it's pretty much the only car in the whole franchise that I'll actually miss the bad graphics on. I find the bad graphics on that car strangely nostalgic, so as much as I want it back, I kind of don't in a weird sort of way, but with this one, it just didn't grab me in the same way as a normal GT40 does, and it's not just because it's not Golf liveried, it just doesn't look as unique. It looks kind of like a Porsche, kind of like a Lola, and of course all eras of racing, especially prototypes, do have some strong similarities to each other, but some eras more than others, and this one for me is definitely one of those. It doesn't help that the car itself is fairly blank, even the livery doesn't look that interesting, and although some cars suit that, like Chaparrals for instance, they're pretty basic looking, to me, a Ford should look more interesting than that, like the Golf livery on the GT40 as an example. But I'm very happy to say, for those who maybe haven't bought this car yet, which to be fair is still quite a few people, because many people don't have the kind of time, for instance, to save up that much cash. Let's be honest though, if I have the time to save up for it, then you should be able to, given how much I work every week on YouTube and in regular work. So it's not so much about the time, it's more about the will, but I can understand if people don't have the will and the patience to save up that much cash. You do have to do the Blue Moon Bay event 54 times to be able to win this car, and that's a perfect run every single time for 375 grand, but still, it can be done. It takes you about 10 days if you really grind it. You can do it quicker if you earn more, but the result is a car that is a huge investment. So when you're paying out that kind of cash, you want to know that you're getting some kind of special experience. And to me, that was kind of the issue that I had with this car in GT6, because just from looking at it, I could kind of tell I'm not going to like this car that much. And when I actually did buy it, that was confirmed, because I use it by far the least of all of those cars in GT6, and the fact that it's also slower and heavier and less powerful than pretty much all of the others of that price certainly doesn't help. Now, to say that it is the heaviest is kind of an oversimplification, because it's barely heavier than the Jaguar XJ13, and if I recall correctly, it's barely heavier than the GT40 was anyway. It's like 2 kilos heavier, which is of course nothing, but there's something about it being a metric ton which kind of put me off straight away. I think of that as being more like a GT3 car or a touring car's kind of weight, even though of course it isn't, that's far lighter than they are, but that was the kind of mental block that the car's specs gave me. When I actually bought the car and tuned it up, and of course did a top speed tune for it, as I did for many cars in the game, it turned out to be slower, about 225-ish miles per hour, similar to the Daytona Cobra. Compare that to the, 250 miles per hour of the Ferrari P4, the 260 miles per hour of the Jaguar XJ13, etc, etc, and it just got worse and worse in terms of how much I actually valued the car. Now though, I'm very happy to say, as I kind of hinted at earlier on in the video, things have changed. Now, don't go into this car expecting it to now suddenly be like a Red Bull or a Tomahawk. It's of course not. It's still a classic Ford race car. But I will say, I like it a lot more now. And of course, I can only speak for personal preference as far as that goes, but I will say that the overall experience of the car, and also I will say that this is complemented by the game itself. Because GT Sport is less inclined than ever toward top speed and more towards the feel and the authenticity and the physics of the driving at more realistic speeds, say 180 miles per hour or slower, through much more technical circuits rather than, say, Special Stage Route X, or going around Route 7, or even around Le Mans all the time, it allows you to enjoy these cars, these classic race cars or road cars, more, I would definitely say, than we could in GT6, because as cool as they were back then, the experience is even more immersive now. The sound is better, the graphics are better, the physics are more accurate. I'm not going to say better, because the cars may actually in some cases end up being more tricky to drive because the game is more realistic. But in the case of this car, somewhat ironically, it's actually the opposite. I think that the handling is easily better now than it was in GT6. It felt heavy through corners, whereas now you can feel the weight that's there, but it's quick and it's very competitive. And now, because the tuning is that much more limited, because the top speed circuits are relatively few and far between, those kind of advantages simply don't matter as much. So it's more about the car in its overall sense rather than specialising it for top speed or just for handling or just for acceleration. And I think that that definitely benefits a car like this, because you can actually get a lot more use out of it. Now unfortunately, of course, the Group X is always going to be something which I don't like. I do wish that these cars had their own category, if not for the sake of just giving them the credit to have their own category. It's just not fair, of course, but we won't get into Group X discussions again. But it is very cool that you can at least use the Daytona, the Mark IV, and the existing expensive classics in those 3 dedicated events. So that's very cool. We can at least do that. As well as, of course, custom events and create your own lobby, that sort of stuff, which you could already do anyway. But overall, I would say that the differences for the benefit, maybe some for the adverse, but I'm going to go ahead and say I don't think this car has got worse in any way, apart from Group X, which is arguable. But in terms of the improvements, I would honestly say, despite the fact that the top speed is technically slower, it's more like 210 now compared to 225, but bearing in mind how much less power this one has, if you put that to one side, which is justified in doing so because you don't really need it to be that quick anymore, then across the board it's better. It looks better, it sounds better, it feels better, the handling is better, and the fact that you can even make it lighter makes it that much more effective. Because if it was too heavy, which in my opinion it was, it's not a problem anymore. You can drop the weight just like you can with, of course, one of my favourite cars in the game in terms of tuning, that crazy Group 4 Veyron, which you can make ridiculously lightweight, a full tonne lighter than it originally was. So I would say that overall, although the Mark IV, along with arguably most, if not all of the other 10 million plus credit classics, is certainly not a car for everyone, because to some degree you do need an appreciation for these classic cars. If you're the kind of person who just wants something that will win a race, then don't bother. Don't bother with any of them, because they're just far too limited in scope, even with the career mode races, for that ever to be necessary for you as a driver. You're much better off spending that kind of cash on buying pretty much any other car in the game, multiple other cars in the game, Vipers, GTRs, Corvettes, you name it, you can pretty much get it within this price bracket of 20 million. But if you are a classic fan, if you're a collector, if you like these old school race cars and old school racing, and to feel the handling and the performance and the vibe of days gone by, then these cars are perfect for that. And although I would definitely still say that the Daytona Cobra is hands down my favourite of all of these high rollers so far, which, I mean, nothing's really changed there for me, not until the Chaparrals come back, if and when, but this one's definitely improved. To the point where I think I actually like this one now maybe a little bit more than the Ferrari P4, which I would have never said in Gran Turismo 6, and I would still not say that in Gran Turismo 6, because it's worlds apart from this game. All of the disadvantages have been addressed, and now the playing field feels a little bit more levelled, and although you could say that's a disadvantage for some of the others, it certainly helped out this car. But that's it for this pick overall. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.